So, a little while ago, I was attempting to have an afternoon nap. I have small children, and my smallest one is still at home, and he has a little snooze in the middle of the day, which is a beautiful thing, and I really am not looking forward to the day when that ends, because that's my quiet time. So I work here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursdays and Fridays I'm at home with him. I'm in my community. We're doing our thing, and this particular day I was quite tired. It was a warm day, and so I'd got him down to bed. I'd done the jobs that I needed to do, and I'd headed upstairs. I'd got under my duvet. I'd put my head on my pillow, and I was ready for a lovely afternoon snooze. And within minutes of my little eyes closing, this very loud noise began. It was a house alarm. I'm sure you have heard such things. They are irritating. They're loud, and actually they don't often cause you to do very much, do they? You're like, what an annoying noise. Who forgot their keys? Who forgot their code? But unfortunately, this noise persisted, and I realised it was very, very loud, to the extent of thinking, oh, maybe I need to get up out of bed and sort this out. So I did get out of bed, and that's when I heard my neighbours talking on my drive. It wasn't my alarm, because I don't have one, but it was the alarm of my very near neighbour, and it was going off, and I happened to have her house keys. So I gave her a call. I was like, I think there's been a malfunction with your alarm. Can you tell me a code, and I'll go round and switch it off. So I popped into the house, switched the alarm off, and subsequently realised there was a trail of glass and debris throughout her house. Somebody in the middle of the day on a Friday afternoon had taken a brick, smashed through her back conservatory, smashed through her French windows, rummaged around her bedroom, gone through her jewellery and taken something, and then scarpered as fast as he could. And on realising that it wasn't just an annoyance, but actually something had happened, it kind of raised these feelings in me, two feelings in particular. One was I was angry because this is my neighbour, and she's an elderly lady, and she's vulnerable, and she doesn't have anything of real value anyway. Like a couple of sentimental jewellery items was all that he was able to take. And secondly, this is my community, and this happened on my watch, and I was so annoyed because I was like, I have this kind of sense in my community that when we pray, it makes a difference. I don't know whether you ever feel like that, but rightly or wrongly, I have this conviction, if I pray, things will change. And so I pray for my community. There will be no more crime. There will be no depression. There will be no addiction. All of those things will shift. And so when something comes along to contradict that, when I see crime happening, when I see someone desperate, when I see situations falling apart, I feel personally a little bit affronted. Like, how can this happen on my watch? And I guess it's because I take a sense of responsibility where I live. I have a sense of calling to that place, and I feel like God's put me there to declare his word and to pray. And so when things come against it, it makes me frustrated. And I had a similar sort of experience here a little while ago. Something happened, and I started to feel like a bit affronted, like, how could that happen on my watch? How could that happen in this place? How could this happen to these people who I love? Like, I suddenly was looking around at you guys and others in the room as well, and thinking, I care for these people. I want to see them thrive. I don't want to see anything or anyone come in and harm them or damage them or try and have their own way here. But I want to protect this place. And I was praying to God. I was like, what are these feelings? Like, what is this in me that I'm feeling about these people and about this place and this organisation that I'm part of? And I felt like God gave me a word. And so I'm going to tell you the word in a minute, and we're going to go and do a little Bible study together. I hope that's all right, but that's just what I felt like I wanted to do this morning. You can humour me in that. I don't do this very often, so that's what we're going to do. But the word that I felt like God gave me was the word pillar. And I felt like he said, you're a pillar. And I guess I've always thought I'm a pillar in my community because we've got some stability in our household. We've got this call into the community, and we get involved. We muck in, we help people, and all the rest of it. But I've never really thought about what it means to be a pillar more broadly. What does it mean to be a pillar as a Christian? And I guess there are certain features, aren't there, of pillars? They're strong, they're stable, they're protective, they're enabling. In fact, the Hebrew word for pillar is matzevar. I didn't get that because I know Hebrew. I got that because I can Google. But it means to stand, to stand. And let me just caveat everything I'm saying with, I'm not here saying I am strong, I am stable, I've got it all sorted, God says I'm this, and there is no, I never crumble, I never falter, I never fail, I'm never any of the other things. But I guess for me, it's just as I explore this word, unpack it and go through some scriptures with you, I guess for me it's a reminder of what I feel like God is calling me and many of us, in fact all of us, let's be honest, to be, and maybe just showing us a few things in front of us that we could aim for or consider. So that's what I'm hoping that we might do this morning. So there are many mentions of the word pillar in the Bible, and quite a few of them in the Old Testament. So that's where we're going to go first. We're just going to do a quick survey of a few Old Testament texts which tell us about pillars. And some of them you may already know. Some of the stories I hope you recognise, and I'm not just like sprouting names and you're like, who is she talking about? Normally I'd kind of explain all of this stuff, but I'm hoping that we've got some biblical kind of knowledge in the room, so I don't have to go into everything. So we're going to start. Our first pillar we find in the book of Genesis, chapter 28. Jacob has left home. He has managed to cunningly rob the birthright from his brother, his twin brother Esau. I think you might remember the story. He dresses up as his brother, the hairy man, puts hair on his arms, and his mum is complicit in this deception as well. And the two of them basically make it so that Jacob gets the birthright. Jacob is the inheritor of his father's wealth and also the one who receives his father's blessing, and ultimately the one in whom the lineage of God's family continues on. But his brother Esau is not happy about this, and Jacob has to really get away for a bit to let things cool down. So his mum sends him off to his uncle Laban in a place called Haran. And this is Jacob on his journey. So Jacob left Beersheba, we're reading from Genesis 28 verse 10, and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Now, I've never taken a nap on a stone. If I'm honest, it's not something I'd ever want to do. But in this story, Jacob turns his pillow into a pillar. I know. I thought that was quite good. I'm sure there's some Hebrew like root to pillow, but I don't know what it is. But the thing that he slept on, this piece of the land, he sets upright, he anoints with oil, and he uses it as a declaration. Sam talked to us a few weeks ago, I think it was prayer day, wasn't it, about an Ebenezer stone, setting up a stone to remember, setting up a pillar, a piece of the physical environment as a place to say, this is a place where I have met God. This is a place where God has revealed himself to me. And what God was actually doing for Jacob at the start of this journey was letting Jacob know that he wasn't just the God of his grandfather and his father, but he was his God. And the promises that applied to his father and his grandfather applied to him as well. And so many of us as Christians, we live on the promises of our grandparents and our parents, parents, but God is showing us in this passage that he's the God of you. He's the God of every generation. He's a personal God, and he's going to be with us wherever we go. And so Jacob wakes up changed, because suddenly the one who's betrayed, the one who's deceived, is right at the center of God's will, and God is promising to be with him. And so he sets up this pillar as a mark of remembrance, as a sign, and as a way of telling a story and marking a place. And that's super important, and that happens time and again through the book of Genesis. At significant events, people raise up a pillar. They take a stone and they set it up, and they say, at this place, at this time, something memorable happened. God spoke, God moved, God promised. There is a physical sign. A pillar is a physical sign. So let's remember that, hold on to that. We're going to keep going. We're now going to go into Exodus. So the book of Exodus, we're going to get to chapter 13, and we're going to start at verse 17. We're going to talk about another way that we understand pillars in the Bible. So when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. So in this passage, we see two pillars, and those pillars represent God's manifest presence. He is always available for his people to follow, and he has quite a specific route for them to take. It says he doesn't take them through the Philistine country, he takes them into the desert. So they're going to need to follow him. This is a road less traveled. This is a route they might not know. This is not the most direct way to get from A to B, which I personally find super frustrating, because when it comes to journeys, I want to take the quickest, most direct route and never stop, because I like to get there. Whereas Steve likes to take a lovely winding road and see the nice things and have a little stop and have an explore, and eventually 10 hours later the journey is over. So but God is probably more like Steve, or Steve is maybe more like God, let's see, than I. But the thing about pillars here is that they are God's manifest presence, and he knows that we need to see him. He knows that he has guidance for us and we need to follow him, whether it's dark, whether it's light. And God has this plan to keep them from trouble and safeguard them and lead them the safest way. So the second idea about pillars is a manifestation of presence. It's dynamic. It's not stone this time. It's alive, it's moving, and it's visible. It's made in a way so that people can see and people can experience God's presence in front of them. Okay, we okay? So pillars as remembrance, pillars as God's presence. Now we're going to look at two stories, because we're going to look at buildings. And there are two stories about pillars in buildings in the Old Testament. Well, there's probably more than two, but there's two that I have found. And the first one is in Judges 16. I'm not going to read you the story here, but I'll just summarize it. So Samson, we remember Samson. He was a strong man. He had long hair. And then he had this girlfriend, and she was a bit of a monkey. And she got into the pay of the Philistines. And she said she would find out the secret of his strength. And she cried and she wailed. And eventually he told her, it's my hair. If you cut my hair, I'm going to lose all my strength. And so, surprise, surprise, they came in and they cut his hair. And Samson is captured by the Philistines, and he's an object of fun, of scorn, and of ridicule. Formerly, he was God's man. He was the strong man. He was set apart and anointed, and suddenly he's ridiculed, and he is exhibited in front of all these people worshipping another god. And he's taken to this temple, and he's placed near some pillars. There are two pillars that hold up this temple. It holds 3,000 people. They're there having their festivities. They're there worshipping their gods. And Samson prays his final prayer. And he says to God, God, would you let my strength return? and if it would return, I will destroy this place and everything in it. And so in one final act, Samson's strength returns and he pushes against these two pillars that he is standing close to. These pillars that basically the whole temple rests on. They are the strength of this building. They are the centerpiece. And he is so strong, he pushes them. And as they crumble, everything falls down. Everyone is killed, including Samson. And actually, a pillar is something that holds up a building. It's strong. It creates a space for people to come into. And if a pillar crumbles, much damage and much destruction can be seen. Haven't we seen that in the church in recent years? People who we have felt to be strong, people who we felt to be holding things, people who we felt to embody, the very presence and word of God, suddenly crumbling and everything around them falls. There is real danger if pillars and people that we put our trust and our faith in haven't got the strength to stand. The second building that I'm going to look at is the temple. So in 1 Kings 7, I'm going to start talking about the temple that Solomon builds for God. And it says this, reading from verse 13, chapter 7. King Solomon sent to Tyre and brought Huram, whose mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali and whose father was from Tyre, and a skilled craftsman in bronze. Huram was filled with wisdom, with understanding and with knowledge to do all kinds of bronze work. He came to King Solomon and did all the work assigned to him. He cast 2 bronze pillars, each 18 cubits high and 12 cubits in circumference. He also made 2 capitals of cast bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. Each capital was 5 cubits high. A network of interwoven chains adorned the capitals on top of the pillars, 7 for each capital. He made pomegranates in 2 rows encircling each network to decorate the capitals on top of the pillars. He did the same for each capital. It goes on about the details. And eventually these beautiful pillars are made, and it says, he erected the pillars at the portico of the temple. The pillar to the south he named Jachin, and the one to the north Boaz. The capitals on top were in the shape of lilies, and so the work of the pillars were completed. At the front of the temple that Solomon builds, the place where God's presence is going to be manifest, 2 bronze pillars, very specific, very beautiful, are placed, one to the north, one to the south. And the fascinating thing about these 2 is that they're given names. I don't really know many places where you would name a part of your building necessarily with a human name, but the 2 names are interesting. So the one name is Jachin, or I think it's Yorkin is how you might say it, and that means he will establish. And the second name is Boaz, and that means in him is strength. So at the very front of this temple, in this really visible, really prominent place, are these 2 pillars that declare something about the nature of God. God will establish. He will establish his kingdom. He will establish his presence. His throne will be established. And in him is strength. And that is the source of the strength that all of us need to be drawing on. If we're going to be a pillar, if we're going to have strength, if we're going to demonstrate God's goodness to the people and the communities around him, we need to understand that the strength in us is God's strength. It's not our own strength. So a pillar is a structure that supports, protects and enables a building and draws attention to and declares God. So what does all this have to do with anything, you might say? She's told us some interesting things about pillars. We've had a little look through the Old Testament. Well, let's remind ourselves. A pillar, first thing, is a memorial, a trophy of what God has done. It tells a story. It marks an event. There's a physical sign. A pillar is a manifestation of the divine presence. It's dynamic. It's alive. It helps people meet Jesus. It's a guide. A pillar is a structure. It protects, enables a building. It draws and declares God's presence, God's kingdom, and the strength of God. And I think that our churches, our communities, the world that we live in needs people with qualities like this. People who can tell their neighbours, people who can tell and remind one another what God has done. People who can encourage people to come and worship God, who can invite people into his presence, who can walk in strength and authority and hold space for others so that they can come in and they can meet God as well. I think it's not always easy, though, to be that person, to have those qualities. It's not always popular. It's not always attractive to be a pillar. In fact, it's quite a different way of thinking to the way that we think in the world, because to build a pillar takes time. A stone takes millions of years to form. A pillar like the pillar in the temple took a specifically skilled craftsman hours and hours of time to build. And for us, the journey of growing in strength in Jesus, of maturity in our faith, doesn't happen overnight. It takes years and years of prayer and listening and learning and maturing. That's not to say when you're young you've got nothing to do, when you're young you've got nothing to say. God brings maturity at every age and stage, but the point is God brings maturity. And so it can be hard to be a pillar, because a pillar ultimately is strengthened by God and declares God. And often we want to be strengthened by ourselves, and we want to show ourselves. We want people to see us, people to know us, people to approve of us. I was watching Wimbledon the other night. I love Wimbledon. And it happened to be Andy Murray's final match. And I don't know whether you watched it, but Sue Barker came out and they did a whole tribute to Andy's career, 20 years of professional tennis playing. And they showed, many, many highlights of his time on the court, winning Wimbledon, winning the Olympics, overcoming significant injury and pain. But there was something I felt like super bittersweet about that point, because what we were watching was a man really coming to terms with the fact that his physical ability was diminishing, and his ability to compete at a high professional level was over. And so suddenly everything that he'd been building, everything that he'd been aiming towards was ending. It was over. There was going to be a change. He was saying, I'm going to be around at home a bit more. I'm going to see my kids a bit more. All great stuff. But ultimately everything, and I felt so sad in a way, everything that he had strived for, was out of his grasp, because he wasn't young anymore, because he'd picked up injuries, because there were other people who were coming along with new techniques and new training and new nutrition and all the rest of it. And I think sometimes that's the way of the life that we live, and the way of our culture is that we strive so hard to be something, to do something, to achieve something, but it's so temporary. Because there's always somebody else who's going to do something different, try harder, be younger, be prettier, be more capable than we are. Because it's when we're looking for recognition, when we're looking for value from what we can do, then that's limited, because we can't do everything and we can't be everything. And ultimately, we are aging, and that's a scary thing, isn't it? I've started listening to podcasts about the menopause. I think that's probably the first time we've ever talked about the M word in Tuesday morning prayers, let's be honest. It might be the last. But it's something that will happen in my life, because I am a female, and it's something that will happen in the lives of some of you and many of the people that you love. And it's something we never talk about, because we're a little bit embarrassed, because it's about getting old. And an old woman is like... we don't revere old women in our culture, do we? We actually think, it's a shameful thing, it's an embarrassing thing, it's something to hide, it's something to be like, we're a bit past our best, and there's some like negativity around that, but it's going to happen. So why am I telling you about this? Oh yeah, because at this podcast that I was listening to, this lady, she was talking about her whole life. She had basically held on to the idea that to be beautiful is to be thin, and that was her like mantra in life. To be beautiful is to be thin, so I need to be thin. So she didn't, she dieted. She had an exercise regime, and it was all about making her body look thin. And then she hit the menopause and realised there was very little she could do about making her body look thin, because her body had its own ideas about what it was going to do with weight and where it was going to put it. And she had this realisation that actually for the second half of life, it wasn't about looking thin. It was about being strong. And actually, that is what is going to help you in your later years of life. And actually, realistically, that's going to help us through our whole lives, is building strength internally, not focusing on our external appearance and how people might see us and whether people approve of us and whether we're achieving something that looks great and gives us profile and gives us influence for a temporary period. And I just thought it was such a helpful point that she made for us spiritually. We can buy into this idea that the aim of the Christian life is to get a platform so that we can tell people about Jesus. But ultimately, the aim of the Christian life is to be a pillar so that we can be rooted and established in him, so that we can be mature in him, so that we can be strong in him. And yeah, maybe we get a platform as well, but the platform is a temporary place and it's a dangerous place because it feeds our ego, and that's not always healthy. To be a pillar sometimes is inconvenient because you have to stay put in a place. Maybe you have to stay like a stone in a desert. Maybe you have to stand at the front of a temple and just say over and again, he's going to establish, he is strong, and no one's really listening to you, or they just get distracted by something completely different like the pomegranates or whatever. Or maybe you're like that pillar of fire and you're just leading a group of like disenfranchised, discontented people who constantly question, where is God? What's going on? It can be inconvenient. It can be frustrating to be a pillar, but I think actually it's something that God is calling us into, to be people who hold God's presence, to be people who demonstrate God's presence, to be people who draw the communities and one another into God's presence. And the amazing thing about Jesus is that not only do we get to experience him, he helps us, he works through us to help other people experience him as well. That's why he needs us to be like him. That's why he needs us to tell the story, to show his glory, to stand firm even when things are pushed against us and frustrating. So final thing, I want to reference Peter. So in 1 Peter chapter 2, he talks about stones, and we think about pillars as stones. But Peter says this: as you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, see, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. Now to you who believe, this stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are a people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. I just think that's a beautiful summary of who we are. Once we were not a people. Once we were just left to our own devices. Once we were apart, but now we're part of something. We are living stones. We are chosen by God to build something. What are we building? We're building his church. We're building his kingdom. And actually, if we're builders of church, if we're builders of kingdom, then we need to work hard to play our part in that, to be the living stone, to be the stable one, to be the one who's standing firm when many things will come against us. And we also need to work not to pull apart the church, not to pull apart our communities, not to pull apart one another here. I'm sure that we annoy each other on a regular basis. I'm sure there are decisions that are taken in this place that you think, if I was in charge, I would not make that decision, or I wouldn't do it this way, or I would do, I'm sure there are many things in this place where you think, if I had my say, I would do it differently. But actually, can we put our preferences, our agenda, our feelings sometimes to the side and seek to build this place, seek to build one another, seek to build the kingdom and not tear down?